Well, it's good to be with you. Lesson 12. We're coming down in the home stretch in terms of the conclusion of the prologue study, which has been just a fantastic study. I want to look at in this study, which is lesson 12, and the last study, lesson 13, on what will be the concluding statement of the prologue. Now, it's really been fantastic. What he has said thus far in the prologue has been weighty. I mean, we've had 11 lessons on this. We walked through all the material, and we've got some 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12 sermons on these verses. And so it's just very weighty material. But it's interesting to me that this concluding statement, John makes a concluding statement at the end of the prologue that gives purpose to everything that he said thus far. This is how he says it. It's in verse 3. It's the last concluding statement. And he says, this is how it reads, because the time is near. And when I was first studying this, now my wife, if you'll talk to her, and I don't encourage that, about this, that is, but if you'll talk to her, she'll tell you something different than what I'll tell you. I wasn't going to study because the time is near. I mean, that's just kind of he goes through, it's all the weighty stuff in the prologue, and he ends it with, because the time is near, and I was thinking, okay, that's great, and I went on to verse 4. But, I thought, well, hey, the time is near, and what does that mean? And hey, these things are going to take place, and I just didn't put that much weight to it. But my wife was doing a study in some of Paul's writings, and she did a study on time. And she comes to me and she said, have you studied that word time in Revelation 1:3? And I said, no. I said, I went on to verse 4 and I'm just going to study from there. And she said, well, that's a very powerful word. She said, you should study it. And I said, oh, okay. So I went back and I looked at it, and you know how your wife is always right. And she did. She nailed it. That word time, out of that study, that word time, which we're going to look at in this study and in next study, led me to the concluding statement. What John does up through these first 3 verses is, again, he establishes, and it's phenomenal. I mean, he says, hey, when you open up this prophecy, you're going to get into him. When you get into him, the purpose of that is to see that he's the answer for your life. Doesn't have the answer, he is the answer for your life, and it'll change the way you live on a daily basis. It'll change your perspective. And the natural lifestyle of the Christian, that's the Christian lifestyle, literally, the natural result of that is you're blessed, which means God's going to reach his hand through your life. Now, all of that is possible through reading the words of this prophecy. And then as we looked at in last study, reading the words of this prophecy, saturating it and experiencing the Scripture as it is authority over our lives to reveal Jesus to us, living in that lifestyle will create an audience. You become a preacher. Literally, somehow, and this is phenomenal, by you getting into this, it will create an audience for you. You won't be able to keep this for yourself. It literally will open up an opportunity for you to preach. And your preaching may look different than my preaching. Your pulpit may not be up in front of a church. Your pulpit may be down at a coffee shop or with some friends playing basketball. It will open an opportunity. Now, that's phenomenal material. But what we found was, this was incredible, is that the last concluding statement of the prologue, because the time is near, gives purpose to everything that he said. In other words, John says, hey, I've told you everything that I've told you thus far in the prologue, and it's very important. But I've told you all of that to get you into what I want to tell you right here. Now, we know that because of the word because. Because the time is near. That's a causative word. It shows cause or purpose. For instance, my wife tells me, Jeremiah, I want you to go down to the store because I need such and such, milk. Okay, because I need milk. Now, going to Walmart's great. The first 3 verses up to this statement is great. It's important. Hey, going to Walmart and how to get there and the details of getting there and the being careful with all the hazards. Perhaps it's rainy or icy and snowy and all the details and the directions and where to go and see, hey, going to Walmart, that's important. But see, if you go to Walmart and I come home without milk, well, I've just missed the whole purpose of going to Walmart. That's kind of this word. Okay, that's what he's saying. I've told you everything that I've told you because I wanted to get you to hear. And the because is the time is near. I've told you everything that I've told you because the time is near. That's what he says. So I want to look with you in this study specifically at this word time, and then in next study I want to look at the word time as it coincides with and relates to the word near. Okay? The purpose of everything that he said thus far is because the time is near. I didn't know this. It's amazing what you learn, obviously, studying the Word, but there are several words for time in the Greek language. 3 that are used specifically in our New Testament. I wrote them down. 3 words that we use in the New Testament. 3 of these, all 3 of these, I believe, I'm sure of this, all 3 of these are used in the book of Revelation. All 3 words for time. Okay, he only uses one of them in our verse here. One word that John uses in his other Gospels, and I believe also in the book of Revelation, he could have used it here, but he doesn't. It's the Greek word we translate hour, or time. It's hora. We translate it hour. And literally, that period of time describes a period of time that is seen quantitatively. For instance, my time at such and such church last year. That's a period of time seen quantitatively. Hey, were you in revival at Bedford Church of the Nazarene? Yeah, I spent some time there. Time seen quantitatively. The scriptures oftentimes talk about the Old Testament as the Old Covenant time period. Okay, the Old Covenant hour. It's a period of time that's seen quantitatively. My teen years were an hour of my life. That's this word. It's a very weighty word. In fact, as you're sitting here, this is really important. As you're sitting here, God affords hours in our life, periods of time in our life where He wants to, speak to us, and they're really important, and He plans those. It's used in John. Give me an example of this. It's used in John when he inquired as to the time when his son got better. John chapter 4, verse 52. When he inquired as to the time when his son got better, they said to him, the fever left him yesterday at the 7th hour, during that period of time. So it's a period of time that's marked in terms of quantity, but it's oftentimes used to describe a significant hour. Again, for instance, as you're sitting here watching this, this is a period of time that has been set aside by God in your life. I absolutely believe that. That's that word. Now, it's a weighty word. It's an important word, and it has phenomenal implications in the right context. He could have used that here, and he uses it in Revelation, but he doesn't. It's not the word he chooses to use here, not the word he picks. Another word, okay, that he could have used here, and this is really important because a lot of people studying the book of Revelation would probably think this is the word for time. It's the Greek word chronos, okay? And chronos is a period of time, well, it's where we get our English word chronology. It's a period of time that's marked by a succession of events. Okay, if I were to describe my day chronologically, chronos, I would say I got up at 6 o'clock in the morning. I brushed my teeth. I grabbed a banana and an orange and a cup of coffee, and I ran over here to the office, and I talked with our office manager, Ellen Bailey, and her husband, Byron, and I went upstairs and set up the video camera and got in the Word, prayed for my wife. I talked about my day chronologically. That's that word, chronos. It's used several times in the New Testament. Now, this is really important. That's not the word that he chose here. If he would have chose that word to put here, he would have been saying, I've told you everything that I'm telling you because the chronology, the time, the unfolding of events is near. And he would be describing the book of Revelation, the focus of the book of Revelation, in terms of a period of succession of events. But that's not that's not the word that he uses here. Nor is that how he describes the Revelation, because the book of Revelation is not about a period of significant events. The book of Revelation is about Jesus. If the book was about unfolding of significant time and events, he would have chose that word for time here. Isn't that interesting? As we're studying the book of Revelation, we're finding over and over and over that the emphasis is away from time and dates, and it's on Jesus. See, if the book of Revelation was about times and dates, he would have put chronos there, because the succession of significant end-time events is near. But that's not the focus of the book of Revelation, which again is just absolutely phenomenal to me. So he didn't use hora, he didn't use chronos. The Greek word that he chose to use here and this was surprising to me, sometimes it's not even translated time. It's the Greek word karios. And karios, I wrote down the definition because it's a rather lengthy one, and it's going to come up on your screen. But karios describes a period of time that is fateful and decisive. Okay, it's a period of time that is fateful and decisive with a strong emphasis that the time is significant and appointed. Okay? Now, within the Christian context, it's appointed by God. But karios describes a period of time that is fateful and decisive. Okay? With a strong emphasis that is significant and appointed. Okay? That's the idea of this time. And in the New Testament, we're finding oftentimes it's translated opportunity. Because that's the idea of the word. It's significant. It's a period of time, and there's an opportunity that's here that is significant, and it's once in a lifetime kind of thing. For instance, it's used in the book of Revelation several times, but I'll give you one. In chapter 12, it's talking about the enemy. Oh, listen to this. Therefore rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has gone down to you. He is filled with fury because he knows that his time is short. He knows that, the enemy knows that his period of opportunity is short. He's got a period of opportunity. After that, the opportunity of his hands involved in things are gone. He's going to be bound. He's going to be conquered. He's going to be cast in the lake of fire. His period of opportunity is short. That's that word. So the word here in our passage, because the time, it's because the period of opportunity is near. This period of time that is fateful and decisive. As we begin to look this word up, I begin to find over and over that the emphasis of karios is not just to generically talk about time, but it's to talk about a period of opportunity that has come upon a person that is fateful and decisive. It changes everything after that point. They cannot go back and do that over again. For instance, I want you to turn with me back to the book of Luke, chapter 19, verse 44. And in Luke 19:44, this word is used, and it's significant. You guys know, of course, you know the scene of chapter 19. It's the temple scene, and the triumphal entry scene, and all of that. Jesus is coming into. This was so significant to me. I learned a ton out of the study. Jesus is coming in to Jerusalem. He's riding on a donkey. It's the triumphal entry. It's the king is coming to Zion. He's riding. It's prophecy fulfilled stuff. And it's interesting, beginning at verse 28, you can read through that. As you begin to look through this section, what you find is everyone is ecstatic. Everyone is excited. Everyone is joyful and rejoicing. Everyone except Jesus. And he's the only one that's not. In fact, as you come down, it says in verse 41, and this is where our word time fits in this scene. Verse 41 says, as he approached Jerusalem and saw the city, he wept over it and said, if you, even you, had only known on this day what would bring you peace. But now it is hidden from your eyes. The days will come upon you when your enemies will build an embankment against you and encircle you and hem you in on every side. They will dash you to the ground, you and the children within your walls. They will not leave one stone on another because you did not recognize the opportunity of God's coming to you. And what he's talking about here is, see, Jesus, the opportunity for them to accept God as their king and be saved is come in this hour. And yet Jesus says you miss it. And so he's weeping over this because it's a period of opportunity that they will not get again. It is a fateful and decisive moment. In this hour, in this context, it will not happen again like this. In fact, he weeps and he says, listen, if you, verse 42, if you, even you had known, only known on this day what would bring you peace. But it's hidden from your eyes. You've missed it. And in a few short years, and you can go back and study tradition on this, in a few short years, in 70 AD, Rome is going to come in and utterly decimate the place. Destroy the temple. And in Matthew chapter 4, Jesus talks to his disciples about that. They're in the temple, and Jesus, his attention is drawn to the building by the disciples. They're like, look at this place. It's fantastic. The temple, it's wonderful. And Jesus says, hey, all this is going to be gone. It's all going to be thrown down. Not one stone is going to be left on another. He says it again here in Luke. This is the concept. This is the deal, what he's saying. That, hey, the period of opportunity has come and they're going to miss it. And tradition tells us, scholars tell us, Jewish scholars tell us, that during that time when Rome comes in and decimates the Jerusalem, that they just line the streets with crosses and crucify man, woman, and child. And it was so utterly destroyed that they did not become a nation for 2,000 years. I mean, it's just, Jesus predicts this. He tells them this. See, this period of time is fateful and decisive, and you do not get the opportunity in this context to experience it again, which is unbelievable. Now, I don't know how that applies to your life, but I can give you a couple examples on how it applies to my life. We decided, we waited a long time before we had kids, and I was nervous about it, and so was my wife. We waited 7 years before we had children, and I didn't grow up in a Christian home, and nor did my wife, and there were a lot of scars and hurts and pains there, and we just didn't know if we wanted to have kids. And finally, we decided to, and we had a son, Curtis Jeremiah Bullock, call him CJ. And I was so nervous about being a dad, because I did not have the example of a Christian father and the home life that I grew up in, and just I was, and combined with that, there was life on the road and how difficult that is for family. It's hard on Corinda and I, not much less a young one, and that complicates things. And I've seen kids who grow up on the road in ministry, and I've seen some of them hate the church. I've seen some of them grow up in the church and still not know Jesus, which, I mean, think about it. Can you imagine going to church every Sunday, knowing all the details of church, knowing all the things to do, all the things not to do, knowing when to stand up, knowing when to sit down, knowing what to say, knowing all the songs, and yet knowing all of that, not knowing Jesus? I've struggled with that. Would my son hate the church? That I've seen that happen with preachers' kids and evangelist kids is just so difficult. So I just really struggled with that. Combined in the midst of that is, should we even have kids in our lifestyle? I mean, dragging our kid around the United States and all over the world, and what's going to happen if he wants to go to a public school? I mean, I didn't marry my wife to leave her at home, and she didn't want to be left at home. We wanted to live on the road together and just experience life in that motorhome, and I didn't want to just see her a couple of days a week, or a couple days every 2 weeks. I didn't want that. So all of these kinds of things mattered to me. So when we had CJ, I recognized that there was a great responsibility in being his father, and that there were, this is the point that I'm getting to, there were periods of opportunity that were fateful and decisive in his life that I got one shot at. See, if I flaked out in the first year of his life, and let's say got into basketball or football, okay, at the end of that first year, it's not like I could go back and be a better dad again. I heard my mom say stuff over as a kid. She'd say, about my schooling in high school and studying. She'd say, if I could only go back to high school and do it all over again. Well, you can't, because that period of time is now gone, and you cannot go back and do it over again. It has come, and now it is gone. And she can go and do schooling again, but that period of life that was set aside in that context is done. You can't go back, and that's that word. And see, if I just am a poor father, it's not like I can go back and do that again. I got one shot at that. And God has afforded a period of time that is fateful and decisive. And He wants to use me in that hour of my life. Now, again, that is given to us in the context of our passage. I want you to go back to Revelation chapter 1. In our passage, the time that he's talking about, now this is really crucial, the time that he's talking about is the time that's unfolded thus far in the prologue. See, he's established a number of things. The period of time that is fateful and decisive is literally the period of time that God brings about. Now, in this next study, in lesson 13, we're going to go and we're going to look at John chapter 7 and Jesus speaking about this time specifically. It's fantastic. He speaks specifically about this time and how it is integrated with the faithful and decisive, that literally God has ordained this and His hand is involved in that. Literally, God prophesied. Think about this. God talked about the life of Jesus, I mean, thousands of years before it ever came to pass. A couple thousand years before it ever came to pass. And literally the fulfillment of time when Jesus was brought and His time had come. And Jesus throughout the book of John is always talking about His time. Okay, it's always about the hour. It's always about the time. It's not yet come. In chapter 2 of John, at the wedding at Cana, his mother's wanting him to do that miracle. And Jesus says, my time has not yet come. Jesus acted and moved and worked in the time of His Father. Excuse me. So what John has been unfolding here in the prologue is that, hey, when we get into Him and He meets every need in our life, we live with a different perspective as the Christian lifestyle. Okay, that opens up the door for God to reach His hand, very important, through us. He brings about, when you're locked into Jesus and you're living as a Christian, that enables God to use you. Okay, God using you is in a period of time. He literally calculated you into His plan and He wants to use you. He's going to literally run events by your life, and he's going to orchestrate, He's going to bring things about. And those periods of time are faithful and decisive. And in the context in which they're offered, you get one shot at that. Okay? This is what Jesus is talking about. What we want to focus on in this study, and I want you to do this with your group and in the questions, I want you to look at the concept of time and the periods of opportunity you have, especially the periods of opportunity you have with your wife, and with your husband, and with your children, and with your parents. We're getting ready to go home for the Christmas season, and a lot of our family is not Christian. And to be quite frank about it, I struggle with going home. It's not a relaxing environment. But I know, as being an agent of Jesus Christ, a vessel for Him to flow through, though this Christmas season, there's going to be periods of time that He wants to use me, that He's ordained to spill through my life. Wouldn't that be phenomenal? To recognize that God has ordained periods of time to use you. This is the concept in this word, and the concept in the passage. I don't want to miss it. Well, lesson 13. We're really excited about finishing up this study. It's been some of the most rewarding and stretching material that we've ever been a part of. It's just fantastic. And it set the tone for the entire book of Revelation. What we found is when I begin to study the book of Revelation, and in these first 3 verses, I found myself so at odds with, on a different page at some respects, with so many of who have studied this book. Dan Boone, by the way, I'll make a plug for Dan, has done he's president at Tribeca Nazarene University, has done a really good overview of the book of Revelation and a very good attempt at it, and he has a book on it. You can research that. But so many people look at the book of Revelation outside of the context of these first 3 verses. And anyone who has studied John's material, any of John's writings, are going to know that the prologues of his writings, when they're present, 3 out of the 5 have them, these prologues set the tone for the book. So many times you have those who come into the book of Revelation looking for, times and dates, and who's the Antichrist, and when is Christ going to come back, and when is the rapture? Is it pre-tribulation, post-tribulation? All of those kinds of questions. The book of Revelation has things to say about those. Of course, that's where those topics come from. But those topics, they take place within the context of the prologue. The prologue is the boundaries and the parameters for the book. Before you ever get into the book of Revelation, he tells you what it's going to be about. He tells you the content. It's about him. Getting into him, you see him for who he is in your life, and it changes the way you live on a daily basis. In this study, we're looking at specifically how this tone, this boundary that he's put on the Revelation fits within the context of what he's saying in verse 3. we found it really significant. In lesson number 12, you went through some of this already. We're going to expand it. He says, the concluding statement of the prologue, because the time is near. He establishes, again, all the way up through the first 3 verses, excluding this last statement, because the time is near, he establishes just phenomenal content, phenomenal material. There's just some outstanding things that he establishes. But he tells you that, he establishes that, he gives you that for a reason. And the reason is established here in this concluding statement. Because the time is near. Because is a causative statement, meaning everything that I've told you because I want to tell you this. And the reason I've told you this is because the time is near. In the first part of this study, lesson number 12, we looked at the word time. That it's not the word hora or chronos, which he could have used, but he didn't. It's the word kairos. It's the word that we oftentimes translate opportunity. For instance, I didn't give you this in the first study, but in Ephesians, Paul uses this term. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 15 and verse 16. This is what Paul says. Be very careful then how you live, not as unwise, but as wise, making the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. The NIV actually translates that opportunity. Hey, Paul says, make the most of every period of time. Make the most of every opportunity because the days are evil. That word kairos, again, to give you the definition, is a period of time that is fateful and decisive, with a strong emphasis that it's significant and appointed. Now, within the context of Scripture, we find that that period of time that is faithful and decisive and appointed is appointed by God. And again, let me walk you through just a little bit of the concept of this. When he says the beginning part of the prologue, he says that to establish because the time is near. The beginning part of the prologue is all about God reaching through the believer's life and bringing about through him what he desires for his purpose. We saw the illustration of that with Mary. Because Mary was locked into God and he was meeting every need in their life, and they lived with a different perspective, she lived with a different perspective, God was able to reach through her life and bring about through her the birth of the Messiah. That was his plan for his purpose through her life. And that was a period of time that was absolutely crucial and decisive. Oh, crucial, man. Faithful. Absolutely had to take place. And so, hey, he said that because the time is near. In other words, as it happened with Mary, it's going to happen with you. There are periods of time that he wants to bring through your life that are absolutely faithful and decisive. Okay? Now, let me give you an example of this. We looked a little bit at that word, but I want to look at it in the context of the book of John. If you wouldn't mind turning back to John, chapter 7. The intertwining of this word in Scripture is so significant because the period of time, again, is God has reached down and he's just orchestrated. He's brought it about by his hand. This period of time that's faithful and decisive is not like, chance. It's not like, happenstance. Not that kind of deal. It's, again, God has come on the scene. He's orchestrated it, and that period of time that he's orchestrated is for his purpose and a reason. Can't miss it, because if you miss it, you miss the opportunity that God has set for you. You see a conversation about this between Jesus and his brothers in chapter 7, and it's just fantastic. This is the setting, beginning at verse 1. I'm going to read through this and we'll walk through it and explain it. Verse 1, chapter 7. After this, Jesus went around in Galilee, purposely staying away from Judea because the Jews there were waiting to take his life. But when the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles was near, Jesus' brothers said this to him, "You ought to leave here and go to Judea so that your disciples may see the miracles you do." Now, they're basically saying, hey, the Jewish Feast of Tabernacles is near. You got to get out of here. You're up in the country, Jesus. You're out in Galilee. You're hanging around all the fishermen, and it's nice, but you need to go up to Jerusalem. That's where the big boys are. Take your disciples. And why should he do that? Verse 4, no one who wants to become a public figure acts in secret. They're like, yeah, you're running for the mayor, Messiah, and you're running for the government office. Well, you can't do that here in Galilee. You got to go down where the rest of the politicians are. Hey, hang some signs, get some commercials, do some ads, that kind of thing. And the way that they see Jesus' ministry is all from the perspective of what He's doing and where He's wanting to go and His plot and His plan. And that's not at all Jesus' ministry. In fact, what John adds in verse 5, or at the end of verse 4, his brothers say, since you're doing these things, show yourself to the world. And in verse 5, John adds, for even His own brothers did not believe in Him. They didn't understand it. See, they didn't understand Jesus. Jesus wasn't trying to make His way. He wasn't trying to break into the scene. He was literally following in the wake of what His Father was providing. Jesus was all wrapped up in His Father. His Father was meeting every need in His life. He was living with a different perspective than anyone else on earth. As a direct result of that, God was reaching His hand through Jesus' life and bringing about not what Jesus wanted, not for His purpose, but for His purpose. Jesus was the vehicle by which God moved in the world. Okay? And it was not, see, all the circumstances that were faithful and decisive, well, they weren't the product of Jesus. They were the product of His Father working through Jesus. Now, we know this. His brothers did not get this. As a side note, before we look at what Jesus says, I've had that with me. As an evangelist, it's difficult sometimes, and the church is changing, and some would think that the place for the itinerant evangelist is no longer here. It's no longer around. It's no longer available. And when I was going through college, I felt a call to the ministry, and I felt a call to evangelism, traveling and preaching and doing what I'm doing now as an itinerant evangelist. And I remember my professors telling me that, Jeremiah, they're a dying breed. You know, you'll starve to death, and that church is changing. Don't do it. And I remember replying that, hey, I can't help it. This is where God has called me, and this is where He's leading me. I have to go. It's not like I'm trying to make my way. He's just leading this direction. And ever since then, God has just provided. And my wife and I were just talking about this a couple of days ago. What happens, if we can't stay booked, and it's not just like we'll get off the road and get a church. It's we've got a motorhome for the next 15 years we're paying on, and we have bills, and we have commitments, and we have ministries and that we're involved with, and it's just how do I really know? The only thing that I can come back to, how do I really know that I'm doing the right thing or that this thing is going to continue? It's based off what He's doing. He's leading. This is His idea. It's not my idea. I'm following. Hey, I could be a pastor. I could get off the road and even become an associate, or maybe get on at a college somewhere and do some teaching. I could see myself going down those roads, but that's not where He's leading. This is the concept. If you could get a hold of this, this is the concept that He has for your life. That all that God has been talking about and reaching His hand through your life, that begins through the Scriptures as you saturate in the Word, and He's going to bring you into His presence and work through you, and He's going to create an audience. The period of time for God working in that audience, reaching His hand in their life, and reaching His hands in your circumstances, and bending this and bending that. Literally. It's a period of time that is faithful and decisive, that is going to come as a surprise to you. You can't orchestrate it. You can't bring it to pass. You're going to find yourself stumbling in on it. Okay? He says that here in chapter 7. Let me walk you through just a little bit of this, and we've got to kind of move along. But in response to Jesus' brothers saying this about go to Jerusalem and come on, get out there and hang some signs up and make your way, Jesus says this to them. Verse 6 of chapter 7. Therefore Jesus told them, the right time for me has not yet come. The period of opportunity is not yet here. And why would He say that? Well, why wouldn't He go up to the feast? Okay. Well, God had not prompted. God had not reached in. Jesus was going to stay put. Wouldn't it be phenomenal if I never acted outside of the prompting of Jesus in significant ministry? That's what He says. And then Jesus says, after saying, the right time for me has not yet come, He says to them, for you, any time is right. See, their steps, their life decisions are not directed by God. Any time is right for them, any period of opportunity. Jesus is not so. And then He says this to them in verse 7. Put this together. This is fantastic. He says, the world cannot hate you, but it hates me, because I testify that what it does is evil. In other words, He says, you're worldly. The world can't hate you because you're just like the world, but it hates me because I testify that what it does is evil. So their lifestyle of working and acting whenever they want to is evil. It's worldly. And Jesus says, I'm not like that. Verse 8, he says, you go to the feast. I'm not going to the feast. For me, because for me, the time has not yet come. The period of opportunity has not yet come. Yet, when you go a few verses, they leave, he goes up to the feast. And you're under the impression, God says, now go. And he goes up to the feast at the right period of opportunity. Okay? The right time for them to move and act and work. So when we're talking about the period of time that's faithful and decisive unfolding in a person's life, okay, it's literally a time that God brings about, that God orchestrates. Now, that word time in our passage is coupled with the word near. Let's bring this together. What John has been saying thus far is that, hey, get wrapped up in him. He meets every need in your life. You live with a different perspective. He reaches through your life and brings about through you what he desires for his purpose. That period of time, when he does that, is faithful and decisive. You can't miss it. It's brought about by him. That's why I've told you, John says, everything that I've told you, for that time is near. That period of opportunity where that's going to take place is near. The word near, that word, Greek word, is used in two ways in our New Testament. It's used in reference to a location, and it's used in reference to time. Okay, it's kind of neat. When it's used in reference to time, like here, it's our passage, it's literally translated at hand. You can reach out and grab it. It's staring you into the face. So this period of time, get this is fantastic. The period of time of God reaching through your life and bringing about through you what he desires for his purpose, that period of time that's faithful and decisive is staring you in the face. It's near, John says. John says, everything that I've told you thus far in the prologue, this is what he says with the concluding statement in our passage. Everything that I've told you thus far in the prologue, it's absolutely crucial because that period of time that's faithful and decisive of God reaching through your life is staring at you in the face. It's right here. You're on the cutting edge of that. You would say, well, what does he mean by that? You know, what does he mean that it's staring you in the face, that it's just, you're about to break in upon it? I mean, you mean like tomorrow when I get done with this video and I go back to work, let's say you're doing this Sunday morning in a Sunday school class, you know, tomorrow morning when I go back to work, that it's there? Well, yeah, but the cutting edge of staring you in the face, it's probably even right after you get out of this class, who you're going to meet in the hallway. It might even be before this class is over. It's you are living on the cutting edge of God reaching through your life. Let me give you an example of this. I've had this happen a few times in my life where I've seen it. I'll give you a good example and a bad example. I was in a church in Iowa. I won't tell you the exact church, but I was in church in Iowa for revival. My wife and I had just picked up our bus. We live out of a motorhome bus now because we have a son, and strapping him in a car seat, those things are difficult travel-wise, so we got a bus. Nonetheless, picked that up, and my wife and son were not with me that week because I had to pick up the motorhome, and it was a lot of different travel, and she stayed at home with her mother. I drove on to Iowa for this revival at this first church, big church. Well, I got there and got set up, and it was Saturday, and Sunday rolls around. We have 2 services, and they were great. Well, Monday morning, I had some errands to do, and when you buy a motorhome, it's probably like a house where you customize things. One of the things I always customize is the shower head. Now, this may seem funny to you, but it's serious business, the shower head. They come with these shower heads that are kind of generic. They just got the 3 or 4 holes that just spray the water. It's very hard. It sprays on you in the shower. It makes for a very uncomfortable shower experience. I don't like it. It's painful. I don't enjoy it. I want to get out of the shower as quickly as possible. That's what that shower head does to you. So I took that thing off, and I go and buy the waterfall shower head. It's got the shower head that's got the several holes in there, more than you can count, and it just gushes the water on you, and it's an enjoyable Irish Springs kind of commercial shower experience. We like that. So I went to get that down at Menards. Monday morning, get done with the revival, or get done with the service on Sunday. Monday morning, go out for my errands to study and that stuff. I go by Menards. I go in there, I find my shower head, got a good deal on it, and I walk up to the front. I'm about to pay for it. I'm sitting in the line, and there's a young girl at the checkout counter. And she's ringing up my shower head. And as I'm fishing for my credit card, she sees my keys to the bus. And I just got the thing, so I still had the keys that the motorhome place gave me to put my keys on, all the different keys for the motorhome on it. She sees it. Well, on it had the address to where I bought it. It was Brown & Brown RV. And Brown and Brown RV is right beside where I went to college at Olivet Nazarene University. And so it's the same town. So it has a Bourbonnais, or Bourbonnais is the correct way to pronounce it, Bourbonnais address. And she looks down at my key ring while I'm fishing for my credit card, and she says, "Oh, Bourbonnais, Illinois." And I was like, "Hey, you've been there." Because if you pronounce it correctly, you've been there. That's the only way to pronounce it correctly. And she says, "Yeah, my brother went to school there." I was like, "No way. I went to school there." She's like, "Get out of here." I'm like, "I'm serious." And we had this big moment. And I said, "Yeah, I went to school there. I went to Olivet." She said, "That's where my brother went." I went, "You get out of here." And we had this whole big reunion right there in the line. And she says, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I went to Olivet," and we talked about the years that we went there. And I said, "Yeah, I'm an itinerant evangelist. I studied ministry there. In fact, I'm holding town revival in your town." And at that, the conversation kind of just hit a wall. And her eyes kind of squinted, and she looked she was disturbed. And she says, "You're not doing revival at this and this church, such and such church in town here." And I said, "Yeah." And she goes, "Did my dad send you down here?" And her father actually went to that church, and he'd been pestering her the week before the revival to come. And then he went home Sunday and said, "You got to come to revival." And she thought that her dad had sent me down there. And I looked at her and I thought, I said, "That's interesting, isn't it? That God just," I said, "You understand that I'm not here by chance." And I told her, and I invited her to come, and she did show up that week. But the period of time, now think about this. I didn't plan that. That wasn't something that I had brought about. It wasn't, I didn't go calling on her. I just was wrapped up into Jesus. He's meeting every need in my life. I'm living with a different perspective. And out of that, God opens an opportunity to reach through me. He incorporated me in His plan, and He reaches through me to bring about what He desires for His purpose. And that period of time was faithful and decisive, and He wanted me to be there. And I was used. And I was like, wow. And I went home, and it was like fantastic. And it was, whoa, good example. Now, I've had examples. I don't want you to be, a lot of times in this study, we've had people walk away and they beat themselves up for missing the period of times. Don't. Hey, God will forgive, and He'll engraft you into His plan. He'll use you, and hey, He's so wonderful and redemptive. And so we've all had times where we've missed those times. I was in revival recently, and I couldn't believe I missed this, but the Lord really spoke to me about it. I was at revival in Kentucky, and it was over Halloween, this last Halloween. And my wife wasn't with me again. She's always with me, but just these two times she hadn't been. But her and my son were visiting her sister in South Carolina. I was in Kentucky. About midnight, 12:30, I'm doing work in the motorhome, and I hear this big boom on the back of my motorhome. And I jump up and I run outside, and I see this gourd. It's Halloween, one of those little gourds, small ones, hit the back of my motorhome. Little residues there, and it broke all over the ground. Someone thrown it at it. And they're hard, and if it hit the window, it would have broke it, and that'd have been horrible. And so I looked around, walked up and down the alley, and didn't see anybody, and walked. And there's a house right next door, and there was people in the garage, I thought I saw a guy in the garage, but I went and looked in the street, and I looked and I didn't see anybody. The lights were on inside, and so I didn't think. I thought who it was, and couldn't see anybody or figure it out. So I went back in the house, and I lifted up the blinds in the back, and Krenda had called me at that point, and I was talking to her and telling her about it. And my blinds are raised up, but you can't see in the blinds because they're nightshade. So I'm just sitting there looking out the window and talking to my wife. And while I'm sitting there, across the street, out from underneath a car, climbed two boys. So I said, "Krenda, I'll call you back." Hung the phone and ran outside, and I said, "Hey!" They turned around, like deer in a headlight, looking at me. And I said, "What are you guys doing?" So, "Oh, just got back, man." I said, "Yeah, you see anybody out here throwing anything? A gourd hit my motorhome." Like, "No, we just got here, man." And then they started saying, "We'll keep an eye on it for you, though. Hey, we'll look." And I said, "I saw you guys under the car. Come on." And I got on them, and I said, "I'm going to go and tell your mom." And they're like, "Oh, don't," and all this. And I let them off, and I just said, "Listen, don't throw things at my home. I don't throw things at your home." And I just chuckled and let them go. But I went inside, and I woke up the next day, and it dawned on me, what if the only way, I come to find out, because I told the pastor in the church and laughed about it, and it wasn't a big deal, and they didn't get in trouble, but found out they were new in town, and the two boys were rough, kind of hooligans in town. And what if the only way for God to get my attention to minister to them was to have them throw gourds at my motorhome? And I still to this day, I believe I missed a period of time that was faithful and decisive for their life. I mean, what would have happened if I went out there and said, I'm calling the cops? Because the mayor of that town and the chief of the police of that town went to that church. And I could have went in and said, hey, I'm calling the cops. And you're going to jail for vandalism. I could have made it sound all, and then I could have said, because they'd have been like, no, please, please. And I could have said, I tell you what, I'll let you off the hook if you come to church tomorrow. I could have done that. And I missed the period of opportunity. I don't want to miss the periods of opportunity in my life. What he's saying about the book of Revelation is that literally throughout the book of Revelation, Jesus will be revealed. Those who are getting wrapped up in Jesus, he's going to meet every need in their life, and they're going to live with a different perspective. And that kind of lifestyle is going to produce an opportunity where God is going to reach through their life and bring about what he desires for his purpose, just like he did through Mary, just like he did through Job, just like he did through Jesus, just like he did through the disciples, just like he's doing through my life, just like I know he's done that in your life. And he's told us all of that because that period of time, which he wants to do that, is faithful and decisive and is staring us in the face. I don't want to miss any more in my life. I don't want to miss any more times. And I told you in last study, I'm going home and next week for Christmas. And I don't want to miss the periods of time that are faithful and decisive in my life where God wants to use me. I don't want to miss that. It's been a great study, and we've had a wonderful time studying the prologue. I'm hoping it's an enriching study for your life.